Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Think Clinical podcast. My name is Hamza. It's amazing to be here once again, and today we are going to be, and you will see in my subsequent episodes that I'm going to be talking a lot about AI. I'm going to be talking a lot about tech because I'm passionate about these spaces, and this is something I've done a lot of work in, so I need to start putting the word out there because it's important for us to start looking into these spaces. Now today we'll look at AI prescriptions. Now what we are trying to look at is how do we ethically monetize generative AI in healthcare startups. How would you do this in a very ethical way, and how can you monetize it to be able to make money? So this is important to me. And again, don't worry about all the fancy words that are used like generative AI and all that. We will talk about all that. But if you can imagine a world where AI designs a cancer treatment for your specific DNA in less than 24 hours. So you have, this is not something anybody wants to hear, but you've been told that you have cancer. And for some reason, the doctor tells you, can you go and come back to see us in the next 2 days because we will have a treatment that is designed for your specific DNA by then. This is what the power of AI looks like in the future. Now, this is what the power of generative AI looks like. Now, what does that mean when we say generative AI? Now, we look at artificial intelligence that is able to create new data and is able to create new patterns or new content. So new data, new patterns, new content. So that's the AI system, but it uses or it's learning from already existing data. So it taps on whatever has been trained on and is able to use that information to create new data, is able to use that information to create new patterns, and is able to use that information to create new content. This is generative AI. Now, when you're able to see things like this, then when we look at the space of innovation, especially drug innovation, it becomes very huge. What am I talking about? We have companies like Insilico Medicine, and they developed the first AI discovered fibrosis drug. And then what that means is that they reduce drug discovery costs by about 80% just by using AI. And they use generative AI because then the AI system was able to use already existing information to create new data and new patterns and new content for them to be able to create that. Now, it's also able to identify drug candidates at a rate that is 10 times the traditional way. So this is a whole different story that we are talking about now, and that's what we talk about when we get into the space of generative AI, because then it becomes a whole different conversation, and we have to be sure that we are having this conversation with the speed with which information is available to us right now. Now, when we look at some key opportunities that may come up here in the space of AI prescriptions or AI ethically monetizing AI innovations, drug discovery becomes one of them. And we have seen AI systems analyze drugs to a point where they are able to predict like the protein structures with a 92% accuracy. We also look at virtual health assistants. Now, as a clinician, I can relate to the fact that documentation and the administrative side of what I'm doing becomes a different burden. What if you had an AI system that is capable of providing or handling your documentation and offering treatment suggestions, such that, well, half of the time you already have the information being fed to you, and you as a human being have to process that information and see if it makes sense. Now, if this is taken care of, it reduces your fatigue, your burnout at the end of the day, because then you don't have to spend the time doing your documentation. You don't have to spend the time doing all the thinking, even though we want to do all the thinking as clinicians. You are now being given the information in a filtered way that you can make decisions on that aligns with your already existing impression of what could be going on. We could also look at things like synthetic patient data, which means that in generative AI, because it's able to generate new data and new content and new information from existing data, we can use that to mimic real patient profiles. We can generate data that mimic real patient profiles, and we can feed that and expose that into whatever we want to analyze and whatever we want to look at. This is the power of generative AI, especially when we're looking at how we can ethically monetize generative AI for healthcare startups. If you are thinking about something like that now, what are some of the ethical pitfalls? I've done videos on AI so many times, but you need to always look at the ethical pitfalls. One, there's always bias in training data. So when you train AI models on incomplete or unbalanced data set, they may misdiagnose patients. So in 2024, for instance, Stanford study found that AI misdiagnosed patients with darker skin tones 25% more than patients with lighter skin tones, which means that whatever information was fed or trained, whatever information the AI system was trained on was unbalanced, it was incomplete. So now it has a higher tendency to diagnose lighter skin patients more accurately than darker skin patients. Second ethical pitfall could be patient consent. Patients may not be aware that their data is being used to train AI systems. So you have to be able to look at this. Now, a 2023 survey found that 64% of Americans are uncomfortable with AI assessing personal health data without their consent. So if you're going to be using patient data to train this system, you have to make sure you have patient consent. Thirdly, we have liability, which, and so the point is that who is responsible when the AI system misdiagnoses someone? Is it the AI system? Is it the person who built the AI system? Is it the person who trained the AI system? Is it you, the clinician, using the AI system? Legal frameworks remain undeveloped in this space. So these are the three ethical frameworks you should always be thinking about when you start playing around with AI, because make sure when you're training, you are training it on complete data or balanced data. Make sure that you have patient consent, especially when you're using that information to train the system. And thirdly, make sure that in terms of liability, it's very clear where the liability lies. Because if I build an AI system and I'm monetizing it and I'm making money from it, is the liability going to be on me? Is the liability on the healthcare institution that decided that my system was reliable enough to take it on? Is it on a clinician who used the information from it to make a decision? Who is responsible? So until those legal frameworks develop out properly, we cannot really inform anything there. Now, when we look at all this, we have to make sure that we look at the monetization models. How do we generate revenue from AI-based healthcare products and services? That is what monetization means. How are you going to make money? Now, when you look at a company like Tempus, which is an AI-powered genomic platform, it's valued at about 8 billion right now. Now, all they do is they analyze genetic data to identify patterns in cancer progression and treatment responses. Now, when you look at all this, now what does that mean? When we start talking about monetization, it means that we're going to look at specific strategies that companies like Tempus would use to generate or get the valuation up to the tune of 8 billion. One, can we look at AI as a service, which means that we are licensing predictive algorithms to hospitals and healthcare networks. For instance, I have had situations where septic patients come in and there's nothing that is working at this point. With generative AI, however, if you look at all the historic data that has been given, new data and new content and new patterns could be created to be able to predict or reduce the mortality of sepsis. And research has shown that it reduces the mortality rate from sepsis by 20% just by using predictive AI. So you can use AI as a service where hospitals are adopting these to be able to predict how to tackle cases like this. Secondly, you can look at the data marketplaces. So platforms like Trinex, they aggregate patient data and allow pharmaceutical companies to buy those anonymized. So they're anonymized. So they get the patient data, they collect all the patient data, but they anonymize the insights for clinical trials. So which means that they can give these companies the information they need, but without the drama of whatever is happening right now, without the compromising patient information. Now, we can also look at subscription models. What does that mean? We can look at subscription models in the form of AI-powered mental health tools. Now, when you have platforms like the Wobot, which have reduced anxiety symptoms by 30%, this is something that people subscribe to monthly so that they can continuously get the mental health support that they need. Now, what are some of the actionable things? You need to establish an AI governance board. They have to oversee your data and they have to oversee your compliance. You have to make sure that whatever you are doing is within the framework of ethics, and you are doing is within the framework of the compliance or the regulatory bodies that are overseeing you. Make sure you use synthetic data if you have the opportunity to train your AI models. Don't use real patient data, especially when you don't have consent for that information. You need to develop clear patient consent frameworks that allow them to either opt in or out if you have to use patient frameworks. Now, how do you future-proof your AI startup? Now, the question most people ask is that if I'm starting an AI company, do I make it an open source or do I make it closed? Now, open source models have their pros and cons. One of the biggest pros and the reason why most people make their systems open source is because of transparency, and it's also to encourage innovation. Now, but when you also make it open source, it increases the risk of data breaches and biased output. So because everybody has access to it, how do you guide this? First of all, you need to build an AI audit trail that is aligned with your FDA's AI or machine learning guidelines, right? So make sure that you have an audit trail that you're able to look at how this is being used. Make sure you implement explainable AI techniques to ensure that AI decision making is transparent and bias free. And the third thing you need to be looking at is to monitor AI outputs with continuous real world testing to catch unintended consequences. Those are some of the things that you need to be looking at. AI prescriptions, AI monetization is becoming a part of our lives. We need to be able to identify how to use it ethically, responsibly. We need to also be able to identify how to use it in terms of the economic value it could have for us. Learn how to build it ethically and learn how to monetize it ethically. This has been another very exciting episode of the Think Clinical podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in our next episode.